Okay, over here on your driven sprocket side, you got your axle in now. Your sprocket, your driven sprocket goes in. Your driven sprocket's going to have a little indentation on the inside. That's the side that goes out. So, and you also have a little felt seal that goes right beside it. Then you have this little metal ring. And then your circlip will go on the outside of that into this little groove right here. So that'll tighten everything up. You can go ahead and bolt this on, put all your little bushings and your all your hardware on. Your little bushings will go in here like this, and you got these little pieces, I'm not exactly sure what they're called. They go on the outside, and so you put two of them on, bolt all four of them, and well, you really can't do that until you get your circlip clipped on in the middle. But that's how all that goes together. Put your bolts on, tighten it all down, and then we'll put the chain on. But it's one step at a time. Alright, so I've got my sprocket back on. I've got the bushings and the nuts back on. I've got all that whole sprocket assembly put back together. I took my loose chain and just rolled it back on the sprocket, and now I've got to use these two screws right here on the back side. They're beside each other to tighten up the sprocket. And to tighten it up, we'll just tighten it from the back side. That's what makes your sprocket tighten up. So we'll tighten the chain up from this side and make sure all that is working properly, and then we'll put our wheels and stuff back on. Okay, so as a test, before I put all the covers and everything back on our chain, I cranked the four-wheeler up and run it through all 5 gears. Matter of fact, run it wide open to make sure our chain was going to drive like it's supposed to, and there wasn't any issues there. So I'll put the guards back on the front and the rear of the chain now, which is there's a big plate that mounts up underneath the bottom. All you have to do is take the bolts out, and with the front one, it's a little piece that makes sure the chain doesn't jump off the driver, and a cover, and just 2 bolts for the front. And then once we've done all that, then I'll get all the wheel assembly stuff put back on, and that should be it. We should be ready to go. Our axle should be good, fresh again. We should be good to go. We got a new sprocket on, new front sprocket, and a new chain. I didn't go over all the stuff about putting the front sprocket on, but it's pretty simple. There's only 2 bolts in there. There's a little twist mechanism. You just twist it out, put your new sprocket in, put your little piece back on, and line the bolt holes up, tighten it up, and that's it. But I'll go ahead and put the rest of this thing back together and give you a good idea about what you got to do. Okay, we got the chain guards on, and I tightened up the chain just a little bit more with these 2 bolts back here. When you're tightening up one of these chains, you have to remember that this axle can turn, it can twist on you and cause the chain or the thing here to be running sideways. And if it's in a sideways, the chain will not catch it and it will not run correctly. So you may have to tighten one up this way and one down to make the sprocket, that I couldn't think of the name of, to make the sprocket get into the correct position. And in this case I had to tighten this side, push it back this way on over here, and the side next to the sprocket I had to push it inwards to get the sprocket lined up correctly. Now there's two knuckle bolts over here on this brake drum side, top and bottom. They're 17 millimeters that you have to tighten up to lock that axle in place once you've tightened this chain. And every time you loosen the chain or take it off or do anything or tighten the chain, you have to loosen up these two bolts. So with that, I'm going to go ahead straight into how to put your wheel hub assembly back together. You have this assembly, which is just 4 bolts on your wheel hub. It slides on those splines, has a little washer, goes on, and this little nut, which this little nut has these little grooves at the top, which is for your cotter pin, and you have a hole right here on the end of your axle to position your cotter pin where you need to position it. So just spin this little nut on, put your cotter pin in, and then the little rubber boot, this little rubber cap slides over the top of all of it. It's got a little groove. Got a little groove on the inside. Just lock it into that groove. Make sure it's on good. Tap it on there real good. And so that just keeps this little nut right here from getting wet, and this little axle assembly right here from getting wet on the inside. It's still going to get wet if you get in the mud, but it helps to keep the water out of it. Also, when you put this assembly on, when you put this axle assembly on right here, you might want to put a little bit of grease in here. The one on the brake side was really hard to get off. I had to drive it off with a hammer with some pretty heavy blows to get it going. So put some grease, some lubricant on here so that next time she'll slide right off with you. And I think most people know how to take a wheel on and off, so I'm not going to go over that. But I hope that you've learned something, because I have.